Good morning, it's Matt with Semper Fly Aviation videos. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. You might notice I'm not standing in front of my airplane. My airplane, my 46 Piper Cub, is getting a new ignition system. And what with COVID and all, it's going to be probably a month or so until I get all the parts. So, kind of grounded. I'm going to do some other videos that might be of some interest to people who are into aviation, whether it's airplanes or movies or books or whatever. This video is going to be on my top 10 favorite aviation movies. Now, there are a lot of good movies with airplanes in them, but what I tried to focus on was airplanes that use actual flying scenes. Also, a word of caution, I tend to like older movies. A lot of the newer movies use a lot of CGI video graphics, which are cool, but I prefer to stick to the movies that had actual airplanes flying. And as we'll see in some of these movies, many years ago, they did things in airplanes for filming a movie that you would never get away with today. So I'm going to go through my list of 10 in these two videos. I'm going to stick to the movies actually had airplanes. Also, hopefully some of them have a cool story. As an example of what I'm not going to have, Flying Leathernecks. Flying Leathernecks is a World War II combat movie starring John Wayne. It's a very good movie. However, a lot of the scenes are just stock combat footage of various airplanes strafing. Some are obviously Korea era, some are World War II, but a different type of airplane than the squadron that John Wayne was supposedly the CO of. So we're not concentrating on those. We're concentrating on movies where they had actual aircraft actually flying. So we're going to start now with number 10 through 6. So here we go. Okay, at number 10, we have the 1949 classic 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck. Fantastic movie. Lots of B-17 flying. They actually got a lot of the flying B-17s that were still around in 1949 to do the shooting. This movie is unique because it was one of the first movies made after the war that was more of an accurate story of what it was like to be in a World War II combat squadron without just the rah-rah propaganda, everybody's a hero, everything's going to turn out great, that a lot of the stock World War II movies made during the war were about. As you'll see in 12 O'Clock High, there's a lot of strife between the members of the squadron. The squadron is basically dysfunctional. Gregory Peck is brought in to turn it around and make it into an effective fighting unit. His management style could be considered by some to be abusive, but he considers that's what's necessary. It's a great movie, a lot of good actual flying scenes. The stock combat footage that they use from World War II is generally accurate of B-17s over Europe, so it's accurate. A few side notes about this. This is the first movie on our list which is going to include flying by Paul Mantz. Paul Mantz was probably the most famous stunt flying pilot of the day from the 30s even up into the 1960s. This is the first movie we're going to talk about where he was instrumental in the flying. There's one scene where he intentionally crashes a B-17. It's the kind of budget they had. They actually went and got a B-17. Paul Mantz got in it and he went out and he crashed it so they could have a crash scene. It's unique because it is supposedly the only time that a B-17 ever took off with a single person on board. A lot of people thought a single pilot couldn't physically fly a B-17 because you couldn't reach everything in the cockpit that you had to reach. However, he's the only one that got in the airplane, he went out and flew it, he crashed it, and he's the only one that got out. So we're going to see more of Paul Mantz stuff later on in the other movies. Another interesting fact about this movie is it largely was filmed at a place called Duke Field, which is part of Eglin Air Force Base in Northwest Florida. It's a field out in the middle of nowhere in the Northwest Florida pine forest. Happens to be about 35 miles from where I grew up, which is kind of cool. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo was also filmed at Duke Field, but that movie didn't make my list. Good movie, but it's not a good aviation movie. So that's number 10, 12 O'Clock High, Gregory Peck. It also later turned into a TV series, which was okay, but the movie is well worth a watch. Okay, at number 9, we have 1954's The High and the Mighty. This is the first disaster movie. Disaster movies are a whole genre of movies now, starting in the 70s with Airport, and then you had Towering Inferno, which was airport in a building, and then you had Poseidon Adventure, which was airport on a boat, and a whole series, and they still make disaster movies. Your basic plot of a disaster movie is you have something like an airplane, and you have it in some kind of drama that's going to take a couple hours to sort out or else everybody dies. And then during that couple hours, you have a whole bunch of little mini storylines about passengers and crew You know, some passengers are fighting with others. One passenger has a past no one knows about. One of the crew members has a problem that could affect the whole outcome. One crew member is going to be the hero. And that plot gets repeated over and over for the next 60 years. This is where it first shows up, is in 1954's The High and the Mighty. It's based on a book by Ernest Gahn, one of the most famous aviation writers out there. If I do a video on great aviation novels, I'm going to have probably 2 or 3 Ernest Gahn books. This is basically about a DC-4, which takes off from Hawaii, flying to San Francisco. Robert Stack is the captain, and he's got some issues dealing with stress. John Wayne is the first officer. He's going to end up being the hero and the rock that saves everybody. Claire Trevor is one of the passengers. There's just a whole bunch of stuff going on. Plane finally lands. Unique thing about this is the movie Airplane, the famous 1980s comedy, which did not make the list because there's not much aviation flying in it, but a great movie. The movie Airplane has Robert Stack in it. Well, Robert Stack in Airplane plays basically a caricature of his character in The High and the Mighty. He sort of takes his character in both movies and makes him into one person, which is kind of interesting. If you're really into the movie Airplane, you got to watch 0 Hour. 0 Hour is an airplane movie that came out a few years after The High and the Mighty, and that's what Airplane was based on. But The High and the Mighty, John Wayne, Robert Stack, Claire Trevor, a DC-4 trying to get to San Francisco. A lot of drama going on in the cockpit and in the cabin on their way there. Great movie, so check out that at number 9. Okay, at number 8, we have 1930 Hell's Angels by Howard Hughes. This is an amazing movie, especially when you consider the time frame in which it was filmed. Howard Hughes actually filmed it pretty much twice. He filmed it one time almost entirely through as a silent movie, but then the technology came about to make talkies, so he refilmed it with sound. He also had to get rid of his leading lady in the 1930 version and get Jean Harlow, because I forget who the first version was, but she had a Norwegian accent, so she couldn't be in the movie. So he got Jean Harlow to come in and be the leading lady. He filmed the first version in Southern California, but there were not clouds. So when you watched it on film, you couldn't get the visual effect of the speed of the airplanes because there was no cloud in the background. So he largely moved filming to southern Texas, hired a meteorologist to help him find clouds, and refilmed the entire movie as a talkie. He hired almost every pilot he could find and got his hand on every airplane he could find to use them as extra. At some point he had up to 300 people working on his own little mini Air Force. He had a whole bunch of Royal Air Factory SC-5s. He also had some Fokker D-7s. And the flying scenes that you see in this movie are actually, it's like a beehive. He had a whole bunch of airplanes flying around, and then he had a whole bunch of other airplanes flying around, filming the first batch of airplanes that was flying around. I think 3 pilots were killed during the filming of this movie. It's a wonder that there weren't more killed. There was one scene where Howard Hughes wanted to have Royal Air Factory SC-5 do a steep dive and then pull out right at the bottom without hitting the ground. His stunt pilot, Paul Mantz, the second film on our list with Paul Mantz, Paul told him he wasn't going to do it. It was too dangerous. So what did Howard do? Howard got in the airplane. He did the dive for them to film. At the bottom of it, he couldn't pull out. He hit the ground, crashed, cracked his skull open, ended up in the hospital, but they got the shot. It's an amazing movie. The flying scenes, when you look at what they were doing in 1930, you'd never be able to get away with that today. But it's got fantastic air-to-air scenes. You can sit there for hours and it's like a beehive in your head. It's just airplanes flying every which way. And to think that they actually got together and did this back in 1930 is quite amazing. But Hell's Angels, 1930, Howard Hughes film, great movie. That's at number 8. Okay, at number 7, we have 1986's Paramount's blockbuster, Top Gun. Debated where to put this movie on this list. It has to be in the top 10 because it's like the biggest grossing aviation movie of all time, so it has to be in there. There's a lot of really good flying scenes. Now, the flying scenes are not terribly accurate to what you would be doing at fighter weapons school in the Navy back in 1986, but there's a lot of real-life air-to-air flying scenes. So in that regards, it's a very good aviation movie. My main problem with Top Gun is there's a whole bunch of problems with the plot that they didn't have to get wrong, and they got wrong because they were lazy, and they could have done a much better job. As an example of that, here's one of the popular publicity photos of Tom Cruise and Kelly McGinnis. You'll notice this patch right here, this red triangular patch on his right breast pocket. Well, that patch happens to be a United States Marine Corps 3rd Aircraft Wing patch. Now, there is absolutely no reason that a Navy lieutenant in 1986 is going to have a 3rd Marine Corps Aircraft Wing patch on his flight jacket. They did that because somebody who put the jacket together liked the color red and they stuck it up there. They could have found a more accurate patch that they liked. They only filmed this movie at NAS Miramar around a couple of hundred F-14 pilots, all with leather jackets. They could have found a leather jacket or a patch that was accurate, that actually was somewhat accurate, and they didn't because they were lazy. And that's what makes a average to better average in the movie. Just, you could have done a much better job. Now, another sidelight about this movie is, unbeknownst to a lot of people, you can win a trivia contest, maybe this in a bar sometime. Tim Robbins is in this movie. He plays Merlin. He is Cougar's Rio in the beginning scenes, and then he ends up in the very ending scene in it. But most of the scenes you see him in, he's wearing his mask, so you can't tell that that's Tim Robbins. This is pre-Shawshank Redemption, pre-Bull Durham Tim Robbins. There's this one scene at the very end where you can see him in the background. It's kind of interesting. Now, Tim Robbins is going to come back to us in a way later on in our list because his girlfriend ends up being in one of our top 5 movies. So you'll have to stick around and see what aviation movie has Tim Robbins' girlfriend in it. But 1986, Top Gun, you've probably all seen it. Supposedly coming out with a sequel. We'll see if that's kind of cheesy or not. We'll see. But it's a good movie. Lots of good flying scenes. It's worth a watch. 1986's Top Gun. Okay. Next we have at number 6, 1966 Blue Max, starring George Peppard and George Mason. Absolutely fantastic movie. Very dark movie. A lot of good flight scenes of airplanes. They got together a lot of Belgium stamp aircraft biplanes, and they altered them to make them look like some Fokker DR-1s, Fokker DR-7s, and Royal Air Factory SE-5s. The same airplanes that Howard Hughes had an abundance of in 1930 were a little less plentiful in 1966, so they had to take some other airplanes like Tiger Moths. There's a few Tiger Moths in this movie, which they changed some tail shapes and some other things and painted them up to make them look like Fokker DR-1s. So, very good movie. George Peppard plays a very arrogant, condescending, hard-charging German ace in the latter days of World War I. It's a very dark movie. There's a lot of evil intent going on. It's a very good movie, very good flying scenes, something to watch on a winter night when it's raining because it's not a real Top Gun, uplifting, righteous brother song at the end of the movie. But it's a very good movie, very good movie. Our bonus movie for this film is one which needed to be on my top 10 somewhere, but I couldn't think of where to put it. So I put it as a bonus for my 6 through 10. And that is 1983's High Road to China. Tom Selleck, Bess Armstrong, Wilford Brimley. Great movie. The story behind this movie is, it's set in the 1930s. This movie was given to Tom Selleck sort of as a consolation prize because he was supposed to be the original Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but he missed out because he couldn't get out of his Magnum contract. So he ends up being a World War I pilot, bit of a drunk, down on his luck. He gets hired by Bess Armstrong, who's a spoiled, wealthy heiress, to fly her to somewhere deep in the back peasant area of China to find Bess Armstrong's eccentric millionaire father, played by Wilford Brimley, to prove that he's not dead because his business partner back in London is trying to have him declared dead and steal the company away from Bess Armstrong. Great flying scenes, even though the flying scenes are set in the Himalayas in China. It's actually filmed largely in what was then Yugoslavia and Croatia. Great flying scenes. Most of the airplanes involve 2 Belgium stamps that are hopping and skipping over the mountains to get into China. The highlight of the movie to me actually was about the last 35 minutes when they get to Wilford Brimley. He is such an unbelievably bizarre character, he makes the whole movie. So if you stick by the flying scenes, hang into the last half hour when they finally find Bess Armstrong's father, because he's a real nut and he makes the entire movie. Okay, that's the first part of my list. It's just my list, your list might be different. But if you're interested in watching a movie, a lot of these are on Netflix, or you can find them someplace on Hulu or Amazon Prime, or you can get them on a DVD. But some of these are not very well known now. I talked about a couple of these movies to my wife, who watches a lot of movies, and a couple of them she'd never heard of. So if you're into watching movies with airplanes, some of these are worth a watch. They're well worth the time to sit down and enjoy them. Good flying, good scenes. That's going to be all for now. Watch for part 2 where I go over movie 5 through 1 and my favorite aviation movie, which includes Tim Robbins' girlfriend. See if you can guess what that is. But for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe if you like this and keep flying. Thanks.